Okay, where does dopamine act, right? Dopamine is going to be very, very important for our discussion of dependence and abuse. There are a number of specific networks in the brain, at which dopamine is released as the neurotransmitter. There are two sort of essential sources of the neurons that will, project out their axons and, form synaptic connections with various structures, various cells. Two essential sources of these neurons' cell bodies that are going to release dopamine in various parts of the brain. This is a cerebrum, right? This is the brain right here. Here's the spinal cord is below here. This is a brain that's been cut right in half. So you've basically taken a knife and you've cut it straight along here and placed half of it down on the table. Okay, so this is the frontal lobe. This is the front of the brain, right? The eyeball would be over here, right? This is the back of the brain, right? Remember the occipital lobe, which is important for visual, processing, right? This is the corpus callosum, right, which is the the white matter. This is the axons that are connecting the two halves of the brain, the left and right hemisphere together. This is the brainstem, and the brainstem is the source of nuclei. These are, remember, collections of neurons that you find in the central nervous system. Neurons that are going to send their axons out. So imagine these arrows that are projecting out here are actually sets of axons that are going to actually at the very end, at the axon terminal, they're going to have all the synthesizing enzymes and the release machinery for dopamine release. Okay, they're going to release dopamine at the very end here. So this is the cell bodies are located in two main nuclei that are found in the brainstem. One of them is called the substantia, which means substance, right? Nigra, which means black. It actually stains black, and it does so because of the presence of dopamine, actually. So this is the substantia nigra, and the substantia nigra is going to project forward into what we refer to as the basal ganglia. And remember, the basal ganglia is a collection of nuclei in the brain, which again are collections of neurons, right, inside the central nervous system that are all linked together by axons, right? They form a network, the basal ganglia, and they're important for movement. Okay, they're very important for movement. The other nucleus in the brainstem that is the source of dopamine, projections, further, forward in the brain, is called the VTA. The VTA is also an important source of dopamine projections in the brain. The VTA is going to be particularly important for motivation. It'll turn out that a lot of drugs, that have the potential for abuse, are going to influence these networks that originate from the VTA. Okay, so in terms of defining these dopamine brain networks, there are three specific networks that are very important. One is the nigro, because it's starting from the substantia nigra. Okay, this is where the cell bodies of these dopamine neurons are located, right? Striatal, and I apologize for the terminology, but striatum is another name for a subset of nuclei in the basal ganglia. So it's part of the basal ganglia, is the striatum. And it's the targets of the substantia nigra. It's where these axons are going to go and form synaptic connections. So this is the nigrostriatal pathway. It's from the substantia nigra to the basal ganglia, or striatum. And it's very important, it'll turn out, for movement. And then these other two pathways originate from the VTA. They both originate in the same source nucleus in the brainstem called the VTA. They project forward. There's one that goes to the hypothalamus, right, which is important for release of hormones that can affect the body, right? It's detecting changes in the body, right? It's communicating this information to the cortex, etc. It's it's a limbic structure, right? And there's another nucleus that's located a little more towards the frontal lobe. It's called the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is a very important structure when we're discussing drugs of abuse. So this particular network is called the meso. It's starting in this area of the brain in the VTA, and it's extending to limbic structures, to structures that are part of the limbic system. Remember, the limbic system consists of brain regions that are important for emotional experience and expression, right? And these include the hypothalamus and they include the nucleus accumbens. Okay? And finally, the last pathway is this VTA, this dopamine source in the brainstem, also sends axons forward into what we refer to as the prefrontal cortex. So it's part of your frontal lobe. This is a very important pathway for dopamine that we refer to as the meso. It's originating again in the VTA cortical pathway.